Come and join the adventures of the Magical Space Pussycats, exploring bookish horizons and having in-depth lady chats. Doobie-doobie-doo-doo.
Welcome back to the Magical Space Pussycats. We are currently recording episode 7. Today we have some very well-deserved congratulations for one of our hosts. And then we're going to be talking about the Kingkiller adaptation as well as literature on the dark web. As always, my name is Chelsea and I am coming to you guys from the Midwest United States, and I am joined by two lovely ladies.
I am Elizabeth and I am in Wales.
And I'm Kaitlin, and I'm in England.
All right. And then after that, we will be moving on to discuss the book of the month, which is the nonfiction essay, How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ. But first things first, Miss Kaitlin got herself a job in publishing. Yay! So very well-deserved congrats.
Oh, it's been a long journey.
Yes. Do you want to say anything about it? No, maybe not like where it is, but like what kind of publishing you're getting into?
So I'm getting into academic publishing, which is quite a new area for me, but one that's quite exciting. The publisher I'm going to be working for is a fairly small independent one, but they've won lots of prizes from the bookseller and stuff, so they're pretty up there with the independent ones. They're doing well. And it's quite a small team, and it's all about non-fiction academic publishing, so I guess I'll find out more when I actually start. But I'm going to be the publishing assistant, so that is my role.
Awesome.
Starting in
Well, very cool. Very well done.
Very exciting.
For our listeners who don't know, Kaitlin she graduated this summer and has been working to get a job in publishing since then, so we're very, very
very excited
of these
for
two
her.
The whole way, being like lovely support system for me.
Aw, thanks, Boo. But we are very, very excited.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
And speaking of very excited, for those of you who haven't heard, I am like jumping out my seat. I am so excited about this. So Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is everything, is teaming up with Patrick Rothfuss, who, depending on who you ask, is also everything, to adapt the Kingkiller Chronicles for both TV and film. And it sounds like the way they're going to do it is similar to what Star Wars is doing with the current franchise, in that they're going to use the films to kind of tell the main narrative of the Kingkiller Chronicle. And then the TV show will focus on some side characters and some side storylines and some of that stuff. And Lin-Manuel Miranda is going to do the music, which for those of you who have read the first two Kingkiller Chronicles books, you will know that music plays a huge part. So I'm really excited, and I'm already ready to like pre-order this soundtrack, and I don't know how they're going to do it, but I just hope it's not lame, and I hope it's as awesome as I want it to be.
It sounds like it's going to be massive. Like I know they're big books, but how are you going to turn that into both movies and a TV show and keep some kind of coherent
it's going to be very... I'm just thinking... It will shock me if Hollywood is content to only do one movie per book. If you can turn The Hobbit into 3 movies, which some would argue that you can't, in fact, actually turn them into 3 good movies. But these are like 8 times the size of The Hobbit. So I'm just having a hard time seeing this only being one movie per book.
Well,
and then it will be
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is like 20 pages long, and they're making 5.
Well,
I have feelings about that, and they're not good feelings in case you can't
Chelsea,
tell.
Mine are amazing feelings, so I will fight you because I loved it.
No, go. You know what? I'm hearing it's great.
Well.
I don't have the emotional investment for a 5-movie franchise sign-on, and I just can't give Johnny Depp my dollars.
Well, that's true.
He doesn't need them, and he's just a bad person. So, I just can't do that.
I totally didn't realize going to see the first movie that he was going to be in it.
Mm-hmm.
In the first
nor did
one.
I
thought.
But then I heard about
he was in
all the controversy afterwards,
later one.
and I was like, oh well, didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, It is what it is. Like I said, he's doing fine with or without my dollars, but
That's true. But the nipples aren't, Chelsea.
I know, they're very cute, while Eddie Redmayne is inherently, like, problematic for lots of reasons, he also played the most adorable Marius I've ever seen in my entire life, so, like, I also have feelings there for that.
Okay, just as a kind of, like, fun aside, thinking of the Kingkiller, how are we thinking it's going to be, and who do we think might be in it?
Oh, God.
Elizabeth!
Because
we should
is it
have
going to be
had
like
time to
Game of
prepare
Thrones,
this.
epic fantasy giantness, or is it going to be
so.
like The Magician?
I don't think it can be epic Game of Thrones, because that's not the book style, is it? It's very different to that. It's like one person recounting his story, which
but that's
not that epic.
That's a frame. That's like The Hobbit starts with him.
But
being
it's
like,
very.
Let me tell you a tale.
Yeah, but I don't
it being
see it as in
more...
the same genre as like epic madness of Game of Thrones. Like, it's not.
I'm seeing it being like the first couple Harry Potters, because the first book is inherently a going to school story. It's the early part of his life, so it's, you know, the confrontation with his like big villain, and then his progression through basically academia up into a certain point. So
more like The Magicians.
Basically, I'm thinking it's kind of like The Magicians. I'm thinking it might be a little grittier, which is hard to be when you're The Magicians, but I just...
No, but the TV show was not gritty.
I haven't
That's
seen
true.
The
That's true.
Magicians TV show, because I didn't
watched the first episode.
I didn't want to watch the TV show, because I was adamantly
but it will
staying away.
And I think it'll
We're
also be interesting
to find out, I think.
Yeah,
especially because the third book's not out yet, so it'll be interesting
true.
how that all works since the third one's
Well,
not
I mean, if
coming.
they can do it for Game of Thrones.
Well, yeah, but they had like 4 or 5 books of back to work with. I mean, I guess if they're just doing a TV show of whatever the hell they want to within the universe of the Kingkiller Chronicles, they can just fuck around and do whatever they want to until they have stuff to do. So
yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff hinted at with any sort of big epic book series that you never get to see again, so I guess they've got that stuff to work with. I did spend like 25 minutes on the phone to my fiance just chatting about it, because it's like one of his favourite books ever. So when he heard the news, he was very excited, and I was like, yeah, but what's going to happen? Like, what do you think it's going to be? And he was like, I don't really know, I just hope it's not shit. And I was like, well, I think we all hope that.
That's
I
fair.
think that is all we can all hope for.
Yeah, that's a fair hope.
But the music element's going to be cool. I think that will be cool.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good. And then next up on the docket, switching gears a little bit, basically completely unrelated, Elizabeth found a cool thing on the internet, which is essentially a LitHub article about literature on the dark web, because I guess the dark web has launched their own lit magazine. It's called Tourist, or The Tourist, Torist. We'll have a link in the show notes, obviously. But it's kind of the fusion of deep technology and literature.
Yeah. I found it really fascinating because it kind of feels like cyberpunk come to life.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, and I think they know that, you know, the people who are running it and who have contributed to it are very aware of cyberpunk elements of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's lots of community spaces on the dark web apparently, and somebody decided that they should put out a thing to see what writers might want to write who happened to participate in dark web stuff, and they got contributors, and they got enough that they could wade through the slush and produce what they think is quite a good little magazine. It's got 3 pieces of fiction, 2 poems or 2 contributions of poetry, and 2 non-fiction pieces, and they sound pretty interesting, I gotta say.
It's definitely, Yeah,
it's like, you know, all of them apparently are a bit thematic about personal privacy and the idea of being watched by a big government and all that, things that people who are on the dark web are going to be interested about.
And people not on the dark web. I mean, I would be interested in this. It sounds pretty cool.
Well,
no, unfortunately, you have to have the right browser to get onto the dark web
Yeah.
to read the magazine.
There is a reason it is called the dark web. But it's interesting because they gave the organizers of the Lit magazine gave an interview to the website Lit Hub, and they talk about kind of how there is this perception of the dark web as a place where bad things happen. And he makes a really interesting point that it's not like it's about the anonymity, and with anonymity you will always have people who exploit it for negativity, but you can also have a great deal of freedom in your creativity when you have anonymity. And that was the thing they were trying to kind of highlight with the Lit magazine. So I just thought that was really interesting because, like, I will admit when I think dark web, that is the first thing that I think is like sketchy people trying to do sketchy things behind the complete anonymity of the internet. And that is part of it, but
it is just a lot of people who are concerned about privacy, and that and just to have art coming out of that, I think, is an important development. I think it's a logical thing that happens with a lot of movements and spaces, that when art starts being created, you've moved on to a new level of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, then, I guess that's actually, not a bad segue into talking about our book of the month, which was a nonfiction pick since it was Nonfiction November when we were reading it. So we picked How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ. This was originally published in 1983, and it is essentially a kind of long-form essay about the different ways in which women's writing has been ignored, suppressed, disenfranchised, disregarded, and all of those things. And she builds upon each premise and each way and method of suppression throughout the book to then kind of explain, that this is why we have so few feminist writers within specifically the science fiction canon, but then also the larger literary and kind of just artistic world as a whole. Does that sound about right, ladies? Did I miss anything big? That sound good? Okay.
Yeah.
So, original thoughts, reactions? How did we feel?
Yeah. I think reading it overall, like when I first was reading the early chapters, I was like, it's an older book. It was first written in the late 70s, and I was thinking, it's not as bad as this anymore. We have moved on. We don't get this, because the early chapters are about prohibitions to women being able to write. So, like, not being allowed, not being let into literary organizations.
Like the legal prohibition of women from actually being able to write. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also not, like, sort of physically having the space, like Virginia Woolf's room of one's own, no time, no, the family structure that won't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
But then the later you got onto the book, the more you were like, no, it's still like this. Like, you could start drawing parallels to things that people were saying on Twitter, things that you experienced yourself. And there was, like, she was giving percentages on university level courses of female writers that are studied or that are on the reading lists. And I was thinking, no, it wasn't that bad. I remember studying, like, one of Mary Shelley's minor works, and then I was like, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and then I was like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh.
Not quite.
What did you think, Kaitlin?
I definitely think the same as Elizabeth. Like, the first few chapters I thought were less relevant now, and the later ones more so. It's quite academic as a text. Like, there's a lot of quotations, there's a lot of citations, there's a lot of referencing, which is good because a lot of it's taken from works that I'd never heard of and people I'd never heard of. So that was good, but it also has quite a scholarly feel to it, I think.
This is not like a sit down and flip through. Like, this ain't no damn
no, like you need to focus to get this. So I did, and I took a bit more time than I usually do with this. Quite a short book, but it took me like 5 days, which is quite long for me. So I was tabbing the whole way through, putting in my little post-it notes at all the bits I liked. or didn't like,
You
as
can't
the case
see it,
may
but
be.
mine and Caitlin's copies are like...
Oh, yeah. They look like little rainbow butterflies. Like, these
post-it
things are jam-packed with their tabs.
And I mean, I don't tab much, but
you know, and I had similar feelings. Mainly just, I was expecting to feel a lot of, like, rage, but instead I just felt a lot of sadness because this book was published, like, Elizabeth, you did the math, like 40 years ago, something like that? 78 years ago. And, like, not all that much has changed. Like, not enough has changed to make it not feel really sad that it's still like this. So
yeah,
it's a bummer. But let's go through it point by point, since we all kind of agreed that it got more relevant the further we got on. So the book is,
and it's a very structured book.
Yes, each premise from Russ kind of is phrased in a similar way, which is she did or didn't do the thing, and then a but. So
she wrote it, but she shouldn't have. She wrote it, but look what she wrote about. She wrote it, but she wrote only one. Mm-hmm. And then it carries on with all the different arguments. Mm-hmm.
And so the first kind of premise is, like we were talking about, is prohibition, which is essentially the actual, both the legal methods of keeping women from writing and then lack of access to tools and materials and education, keeping women out of school, keeping women literally too busy with the menial, like, emotional labor of running the house so that they don't have time for creativity, those kinds of things, which there's not, like, that's definitely still there, but at least in terms of the structural legalities of prohibiting women from education, that's not.
I think if we're talking, like, you know, in Europe and the West and like most of the world, even, like, the legal sort of prohibitions and stuff, the expectations that everybody goes to school to a certain age are still there. But I mean, there are still places where it's an issue, where people are still working on girls going to school, you know, around the world. But that seems to have mostly gone. But there's still, I guess you still find the expectation. We still get that thing in, you know, women's magazines and that societal thing of, are you doing what you should be doing first?
Yes.
Like, you know, is your house clean? Are you looking after your partner?
Have you made have you home cooked your meal? Have you folded your laundry? Have you done all of those things? Which, spoiler alert, no, I have not.
I was going to say, Chelsea, I'm like right there with the no.
I've like not done any of those things. And then along with that, we move on to the second part of Russ's premise, which is she wrote it, but she shouldn't have. So that is bad faith, which is basically creating social systems that either ignore women's writing or devalue women's writing to the point of a practical ignorance. Essentially, we're getting at the systemic institutions that keep women from writing.
It's a very, very short chapter. It's only like 3 pages long, and she's just explaining the idea of bad faith, that, like, people... She wrote it, but she shouldn't have. Like, women shouldn't write. It's not expected. Why would you do it?
Like, if you are writing, that means you're inherently ignoring a different aspect of your life that you should have been doing instead, basically.
It builds on the prohibitions, and then it builds into the denial of agency chapter, which is that if women do write, it's because there's something uncontrolled in them that they should have controlled, that a good woman, like, literally has herself under control emotionally, societally, culturally, and she would not have written it. Like, a good woman does not write. And so that, she says, like, in reviews, they often say that it was like an emotional outpouring, and that the way a book is reviewed, if they think a man wrote it, if a reviewer thinks a man wrote it, as opposed to if they think a woman wrote it, is completely different.
And along with that comes the idea, too, that a woman's name on it was more than likely written by a man. So you have these theories of the Brontes' work being largely written by their brother, or Virginia Woolf's work being largely composed of ideas from her husband, and these kinds of ideas that say, even though they may have put pen to paper, the creative act of writing was not done by their minds, and thus it's not a legitimate work of writing, of creating, of being art.
And It was really funny because this was, I think, the point at which I started thinking, oh no, you know what, this is actually sort of more relevant to today. I've heard writers talking about this. So when you get, like Cameron Hurley talks about it a lot, how she has an ambiguous name. And she always said she thinks she's benefited from having a gender ambiguous name because Cameron, it's spelt with a K. Nobody's sure whether it's a man's name or a woman's name, and often people will refer to her as him, the author. And she thinks she gets a different reaction because of that.
Yeah, I think
and
it's
it was
like
maybe
evident that Robin Hobb gets a different reaction for using a pseudonym, and that's why she did it when she started in epic fantasy, because epic fantasy is dominated by men, and another man on the scene writing another epic fantasy wasn't a big deal, but a woman was, and so she went with Robin Hobb because that's a man's, or could easily be a man's name.
And I think, and then you have, you have J.K. Rowling and the Robert Galbraith thing, and that's interesting because that's going reverse because she, well, first of all, she dropped Joanna and went by J.K. because, shockingly enough, it's gender ambiguous. But even then, to then adopt a male pseudonym when you're switching to a crime genre, I think is an interesting choice to make. And I'm not saying she did it for gendered reasons. I think there are probably other things going on there when you're as famous as J.K. Rowling, but it's just interesting.
It was another step away from her actual identity. But yeah, it was interesting, especially in crime where actually female authors are pretty dominant, I think. Well, not, I don't know, but it's a much more equal sort of split of the numbers.
And I think it's interesting that you say that that's kind of when it started to modernize Free Elizabeth, because I don't think it hit me till the next one, which is that the chapter is called The Double Standard of Content, which to me the best way to sum up that chapter is basically like chick lit. Like, women just, when they write, they write about feelings and they write about domestic things and families. But when men write, they tell stories, and they tell stories that have universal importance, and everybody can, take something from a story by a man, but only women read women's fiction. And it's just like,
this is on the like cover, it's she wrote it, but look what she wrote about, because it's like she wrote about,
fuck you, look what I wrote about, like what
kitchens and and she brings up all these like in the olden days people talk about how like women as authors, they had very narrow experiences. They didn't have the experiences of men, of going out in the world.
Yeah.
And so they didn't know about real characters. And it was like, as though male authors knew about female characters and they didn't socialize with them.
Or there's not like actual, like, women just stay at home in some vacuous bubble that involves no interaction with the rest of the world at large. And like, thus they don't have stories to tell. Like, it just completely... That's to me where I started to be like, maybe we haven't moved on quite so much from when
and this is what gets me with the this is like hard SF versus soft SF. This is the bloody argument, and I hate it.
Yes.
Like, it used to be that because it was like a gender divide in the employment, so women wouldn't know about the science, so they couldn't write about it. And it was like, no, it's not that. It's that there are different stories to be told, and one is not better than the other.
Yeah.
One is not more science fiction than the other. But it's the application of saying that one is better than the other simply because it's about something different.
Yes.
As though that could ever be an accurate summation of the world.
Which is, and so then we move on to false categorizing, which is basically instead of recognizing women for their own creations, we associate them with their male counterparts. I saw this specifically a lot during the Olympics with athletes. It was, instead of, this female athlete wins gold medal, it would be like, so-and-so's fiance comes in first at the Olympics. And it's that complete removal of individuality of women as people. When Joanna Russ talks about it, she talks about how in doing that, you not only remove like any validity from the creation, like the writing as a piece, like as a thing, but also from like just women as people.
Yes, women as individual human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one that gets me every time, because I was got by it, is Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Mary Shelley was married to poet Percy Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
Could you wander around the streets and take a poll of people who actually could quote one of Percy Shelley's poems?
Oh, fuck no. Hell no.
No.
You couldn't.
How
I
many
couldn't.
people, I know one, and I did an English degree.
Yeah, I don't know.
I did an English degree, and I don't even know if I could name you one.
Yeah.
And
But, like, how many people know the idea of Frankenstein?
yeah,
That's
exactly.
pretty universal, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, like, she was not married to the poet Percy Shelley. He was married to her.
Exactly. Please and
Like,
thank you.
But I will say, I think, I don't know if this is just me, in my head, I don't know who Percy Shelley is until you just said that. Like, I was
Okay,
never
he's a
taught
poet.
that he was the person
Mm-hmm.
to know about. I was taught that Mary Shelley was the person to know
Mm-hmm.
about, and I don't know who her husband is. So maybe that was just luck of the draw
Well,
with
that's
me and
good.
my teacher. But
Yeah.
but I
I
wasn't
think
taught
that's
about
good,
him.
but it's.
so-
I think it's because of the story of Frankenstein and how it came to be.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
because it was her and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, and
they were
went
telling
off
ghost
the lake
stories, and they were like
blah,
in a
blah,
cabin, and yeah. It's
But
actually a
then
very good
somehow
story.
Yeah.
It is a good story.
Somehow
yeah.
it's always all about them and not the fact that she survived them by decades and went on to write multiple other books.
Anne
and
was like
stories.
16 when she wrote Frankenstein. Like,
I know.
that teenage girl just like wrote a book that we still talk about. Anyway, it feeds into the next point, which is while we love Mary Shelley, Elizabeth might be able to name another thing that Mary Shelley wrote that wasn't Frankenstein.
Yeah,
I can, but I think I'm the odd one out purely
Yeah.
because I picked it up off the shelves once.
Mm-hmm. Which in the next chapter, and the next thing we're talking about is that isolation, which is essentially she wrote it, but she only wrote one of it. So we think of Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, Charlotte Bronte wrote Jane Eyre, we have Pride and Prejudice. Yeah. Jane Austen's got a couple floating out there, but the main idea being when we think of female writers, there's usually one primary title that we associate with that author, and that's about it.
Even super famous ones like Ursula Le Guin. Mm-hmm. She is the one woman in science fiction that everyone can name, but they can only name The Left Hand of Darkness.
Yep. Usually. Maybe The Dispossessed. Yeah. Like there's maybe one or two.
But
I don't know. If you're outside SFF, I doubt you would know any others.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. That's very true.
But I mean, when you're first in, it's like, can you name any female author in science fiction and fantasy? Like in science fiction, and they'll say Ursula Le Guin, and it's like anyone else. Literally.
Yeah, if you're new to the genre, it's like a battle to figure it out. Yeah, even though they're out there.
You could. Yeah, but if you talk about somebody of an equivalent sort of era, and you go like, oh, I don't know, like Asimov. I could, you can name a couple off the top of your head, probably, with, like, Foundation, iRobot.
Yeah. That's all I got, but that's two. That's one more than you usually associate with female writers. So it's just, and it's interesting because not only is that unfortunate from, like, a publishing and an access angle, like, usually only a couple of titles are published, it's also creates this myth and this idea that we only need one. Like, it's okay. Yeah. Like, we only need, like, we got a lady, she wrote a book, we're cool. Like, check in the box, moving on. And that's not...
And it adds to that sense of anomalousness, like, she wrote it, but it was kind of an accident. Right. Like, it just popped out.
Or, like, it's so
one day.
It's so weird. Like, or it's so weird that maybe she didn't write it. It was the masculine voice inside her head. That was my favorite thing that Russ said. Russ put out this general kind of theory that when people say, like, oh, she wrote it, but she's so eccentric, what they really mean is, like, the man part of her wrote it, not the female part. Just the smart man dude parts of her brain wrote it. And I'm just like, no.
No.
Oh, man. No.
Yeah.
And it also plays into this problem of it feeds into that. It's all a bigger feedback circuit. So then you get into this issue with lack of modeling of female writing. Like you were saying, like before I got into SFF, if you had asked me, I probably could have named Ursula K. Le Guin and Tamora Pierce because those were the only two SFF lady authors my library had.
Yeah.
And from that, I could name maybe one or two. And if I had not been the kind of reader who was looking for more stories, I would have thought that was all there was. Like, those were just the only ladies who were publishing in science fiction. And God forbid I had wanted to be a writer at the time and thought that there was no place for me or no room for me.
Well, yeah, and also it's so that people can say, well, yes, there are women writing in science fiction and fantasy. Here they are, all two of them. Let's move on. It's not a problem anymore because we've answered the question.
Yeah.
Like, it allows them to tick the box and move on and pretend that it's all okay. Like, we've included however many. And she talks about the percentages in here, and it was really fascinating.
This chapter made me really mad because she got into the statistics of, like, she looked at, like, college syllabi and which authors were represented in what works, and it was just, like, it didn't matter where you were coming from. It was literally, like, 7% women, and we're good. Like, we're cool.
And she was talking about how, it made me examine my thoughts, and like I said before, it was shocking to me when I thought back how few women we actually studied in a lot of the modules. But then she talked about how the one that really got me was, she said, you look at a syllabus and it's like 7% women, and then she said, but if you increase the number of women, so say we add to the canon, we'll introduce more women, we'll allow, Aphra Benin, we'll allow more Brontes, we'll allow some modern writers. She said the number of men go up as well. Yeah. Your actual percentage stays the same. It's like, and she says if we start cutting down on the men, the number of women disappear as well. So you get that static percentage.
And she gets into, and this is the same chapter I think where she talks about tokenism too, which is that percentage representational idea of, however many men we have, as long as we have at least one to two women for every X amount, then we will have achieved proper representation. And it was interesting because this is when I started to think about all of this in representation, like in relation to people of color as well. Because she
does bring that in a bit.
And which granted, given the time the essay was written, I understand why she wasn't trying to be kind of as cross-contextual with it, but a lot of the things in this book also apply to how we delegitimize people of color and authors of color as well. So many of the arguments that we hear were exactly what I've seen and building slowly, like people constructing these arguments on Twitter, on blogs, on YouTube, talking about diversity and the importance of criticism, and it's relevant to a conversation that was going on last night on Twitter where people were talking about the criticism of a particular young adult novel, and how a lot of people didn't spot it because there's not enough inclusivity and diversity sort of going on, and it was just fascinating.
All very relevant.
It was very interesting. I'll link the tweet thread down below, but essentially Marines from My Name is Marines, who is a woman of color on BookTube. She's Hispanic. She was essentially talking about how in the realm of YA BookTube, the biggest reviewers are coming from places of privilege that will prevent them from being able to spot a lot of these harmful tropes and a lot of these harmful kind of stereotypes that continue to pop up. And if they don't catch them and don't review them and don't acknowledge them, then there is an entire community left uninformed. So that's why we need people of color to not only write and not only read, but to review and to put out voices of criticism. And the same goes for women and for LGBT, like members of the LGBTQ community. Just acknowledging what other people can't see and kind of forcing them to see it, essentially.
And it forces the minority groups sort of to have to speak out more loudly and come from a position of arguing against things as opposed to just saying, no, didn't like this, let's move on. Yeah. Like, you have to be like, no, you were wrong. Which is a very different kind of sort of situation to be in. Yeah. And especially it makes you have sort of seem different. And it was like, going back to the percentages, when she talks about how that percentage of women in text and stuff, it's seen as appropriate when women only make up less than 25% of a list. That is equal. And it reminded me of that study that was done about women and men talking in groups.
Yes. I hate this. I know it. Yeah.
Women are said to be talking the appropriate amount when they talk for 15% or less of the conversation, and are seen to dominate it when they only talk 30% of the time.
Yeah.
And it was this sort of almost the same with, like, in a group of texts. If you took like a bunch of books and said, you know, of these college texts reading lists, are they equal? And it wouldn't be.
No, it wouldn't be. Yeah, that that idea that like a room full of 10 people, men will see it as dominated by women if it's like a 50-50 split or something like that. It gets to me on a level that's deeper because it starts to get to the institutionality and the larger like power systems in play. I'm thinking specifically of like the media and the more subtle ways that the media kind of disenfranchises and delegitimizes women. And this plays into the last kind of 2 points that Joanna Russ makes, which is either that women have to kind of downplay and deny their femininity in order to be taken seriously, or that if they as people won't do that, we as a society will kind of create categorical realms in which we can demean what they create. So essentially, we make really popular things that put women in a bad light. Here I'm thinking of like Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones is super popular. Game of Thrones is horrible to women. Like last season notwithstanding, and so we normalize and legitimize these pieces of fiction and these pieces of art that perpetuate this disenfranchisement of women. And that's like and a big structure.
And things that people like, things that are popular with women and especially with younger girls are, as soon as they get popular, are derided and ripped apart in a way that things that, you know, older men like are not in the same way, not at all. So things, stupid things like pumpkin spice lattes and leggings. Yeah. And
or like fandom, like the term fangirl can be used very derogatorily, like or just, you know, just in general, you see it a lot on Tumblr. I spend a lot of time on Tumblr for like fan fiction stuff, and you can see it a lot of people who talk about Tumblr. Usually it's not people who are actually on Tumblr. It's just people who are talking about it. And there's just this idea that it's nothing but like squeeing teen fangirls who don't know, like who just love a thing and don't know anything about it.
But it's the same reaction people have to romance. It's a whole genre, and we can talk, you know, like a whole genre, and people just talk about it in this insanely derogative way as though there's only one or two sort of types of story that are in this genre, and that's all there is, and it's all trash.
Which, like, to be fair, talk all the shit you want on romance, but, like, romance publishing is booming. Romance readers are knocking that shit back like candy. If there's one area of publishing that never seems to be hurting, it is always romance.
And it's the, you know, the movement of women out of, she was saying, like, a lot of women, because they're so pushed out and don't have these models in like mainstream literary fiction or whatever, because it has to be about the real issues. Like, have grown and flourished in romance, fantasy, SFF, crime, all these genre areas where it was, I don't know, I guess less of an issue, but where the aesthetics are different, because the aesthetics of lit fic were or are very masculine.
But that about wraps up the actual kind of chapter by chapter
because
breakdown.
I feel like I understand the book so much better from just listening to you two talk about it a lot. I feel that all makes more sense now.
Well, and that's the thing about talking about, you know, suppressive structures of power, is putting them in context with other people is always a very helpful way to kind of break them down and understand them.
It's a hard text if you've not gone to university and studied English to wrap your head around how to fit it into your modern day life a bit. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, because you were saying, both of you, like, oh, I could definitely see how this relates, and I was thinking, well, I see bits of it, but I don't see it as much as the two of you. And I think now that you two have sat down and said all that, I'm like, I'm more on the level now. I get it more.
Yeah.
I understand the things, which is good. Which is why I just sat back for a while.
I think, yeah, it applied as well, I think, to real life, to just generally going around and stuff. The idea of isolation, like reading this book in isolation, as opposed to creating a community of women and men, but like, you know, where you include other women in your life and can talk to them about experiences, about your reading, about what was right and wrong and what felt weird to you, and that you're not the only one experiencing this is so important, which is why I think is part of why we started this, and why I found like other podcasts like Fangirl Happy Hour and like Galactic Suburbia just felt like finding a little home on the internet.
Exactly. It's like finding friends who you never knew
you just suddenly
needed.
feel like you're not the mad isolated person.
It like it just legitimizes your experience. It just takes it from the realm of like, this is me and I have experienced to these things of like people, like these are things that people have experienced on the whole, and we can share in that.
Definitely.
Because she talks about a student of hers who said, you know, all my models of femininity came through male written text. You know, how women should be in a relationship, how women should be in society and in work, all came from books written by men, and they are just models of a pretend person.
They're wrong. They're just, that's not how.
They're just like one-dimensional figures, whereas the, you know, and you start feeling like you're a mad alien because you're not like that. And I think that lack of models thing as well, that lack of history. There was one bit I put like a huge tab with an exclamation mark on, and it was like, it was about in order to have her belong fully to English literature, the tradition to which she belongs must also be admitted. That lack of history, it's a denial of the history of women's writing, as well as denial of, like, you know, that they did it or that it's not as good or whatever. Like, that there are huge numbers of women that wrote amazing stuff that have been forgotten. And this is exactly why we're reading the books that we pick in this podcast. I thought it articulated that really well, is that you could name tens and hundreds of male writers of fantasy and science fiction who wrote before the 1990s, but could you do the same with women? I can name loads who are writing right now.
But the further back you go, the harder it gets.
The further back we go, the harder it gets, and
it is hard. And when we started the Lady Vaults, we had to like research it. We had to sit down and ask Twitter and go online and be like, right, we need to find some people that we can read. Let's do that.
And even now, we don't, like, this book was out of print. Like you said, Kaitlin, like, that's one of the great ironies of a book about the suppression of women's writing no longer being printed widely and sold widely and easily available. It's you're right, Elizabeth. It was good feels. It ended on a good note because it just reminded us and reminded me kind of why we fight the good fight, and it can be really hard and really exhausting, and I'm not trying to like delegitimize people who are really tired and exhausted by doing it, but that's why we read what we read and talk about it and strive to offer that representation and that conversation for people to join us in. And I gotta tell you, 2016 has been real shitty, you guys. So it was nice to have a good kind of uptick to end on, and a good kind of reminder of that there are fellow good people and thinkers and people who are striving for truth and facts.
And speaking of...
And I liked the ending where she was just like, I've been trying to finish this book for ages, but there's more to say, so you finish it.
You have to do it. And I was like,
damn it, that's amazing.
Well done. Good job, Joanna.
Did your editions, you guys, have the afterword?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Because I was like, although she mentions it several times about, she says that the problems for authors of color are kind of parallel to those of women.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about, how women are basically treated as a minority group despite making up 50% of the population. She didn't really talk about intersectional problems, how the fact that there are black women who have both sides of the issue, and so on. But then she gets to the afterword and said she was trying to do a book on black writers and on the same sort of like issues that happened there. And she said, and it just got bigger and bigger, and she realized that actually, why was she doing, like, that she had been guilty of ignoring it in exactly the same way, and why was she the person who was going to correct it when there were so many amazing books? And instead of writing it, she's just given you a selection of pointers to other amazing books by black writers.
She literally just does like an own voices list at the end, and she's like, I realize that as a white lady, I maybe shouldn't be the one telling you about how awesome people of color like are in the science fiction world, so I'll just let you tell them themselves with these quotes.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll link some of them in our description for you to go and check out.
Yeah, it's a fantastic list, and it made me think, damn it, I need to read.
Yeah, same.
I definitely added some authors to my TBR from that quote section at the end.
So that was great.
And I thought it was nice that she did go back and kind of mention intersectionality and some of the things she had missed the first kind of go around. I always think it's nice in afterwards when authors can go back and kind of look at their own writing in that critical way and fill in some of the gaps.
Yeah,
exactly.
So, I think that, unless anybody else has huge thoughts, I think that about wraps up How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ.
Mm-hmm.
It was good, guys. It was good. I was not as ragey as I thought I would be. I think we hit a better place.
It was not at all a rage fest. It was
good.
It was more of a
very
thought-provoking, interesting thing. Yeah.
So for the next time, we have a little kind of special surprise for you guys. We are actually not going to be reading a book. We are going to be drop the mic. We are going to be doing our best of 2016 lists. Our next episode should come out sometime towards the beginning of January, and we are each going to be back with, should we say, like 5-ish, ladies? The top 5-ish books of 2016, or just, media, things that we really liked, and we're just going to kind of come and shout some titles at you guys and share some love for the things we liked. Yeah, we'll just do a little yearly wrap up. So join us for that. Nothing to read, just come and listen to us talk about some things that we loved. But before we go, what is everybody currently reading? Kaitlin, what do you got?
I'm currently only reading one thing that is not non-fiction, so I'm going to talk about that. Nice. So I just decided that Christmas is almost here, and I have not read enough epic fantasies that are like huge, and Christmas is always the time that I really like to do that, so I decided I would start one. So I've just started Ruin by John Gwynne, which is the third book in The Faithful and the Fallen, which is a very sort of classic big fantasy. It's kind of in the same vein as classic fantasies, so like Tolkien, that sort of stuff, but less frivolous language. And
yes, please.
There's like
fewer songs. Is there less poetry?
Fewer songs, but there are still things like, a big prophecy and things like that. So very tropey ideas in it. However, I do think John Gwynne does the tropey ideas quite well, and he's got like a whole world where there's one person who's like a good guy and one person who's a bad guy, but the bad guy thinks he's the good guy, and he's like very disillusioned in the book I'm reading right now. He's just found out he's not. So basically it's all getting very dramatic and very exciting, and I'm listening to the audiobook because I like the audiobooks, and that's my read at the moment. So that's my main one because it's like 800 pages. So
yeah, that's fair.
What
about you, Elizabeth? Are you reading anything? Was this the thing you finished and now you're not reading anything again?
Yeah, basically. So I'm starting two things at the moment. both from Book Smugglers Publishing.
Oh, nice.
Good choice. Good life choice.
Yeah. And both kind of collections of shorter works, but all tied together. So there's Hurricane Heels by Isabel Yap and The Convergence of Fairy Tales by Octavia Cade. And Hurricane Heels is about a group of friends. They go off to summer camp and they get like recruited by a goddess to fight against evil.
I've heard really good things about that book.
Yeah.
I've heard really good.
Items of power. It's like, if you remember old kids' fantasy books, you know, your kids in Narnia and whatever, they go off and they get given swords and told to fight the forces of evil. Yeah. Well, it's like that, but except it's been going on for 10 years and they've grown up and they want to, like, have a life and it's all got a bit...
They want to give their magic shit back and, like, be grown-ups.
Yeah. Like, because it's like, why would that work? Yeah, because you just think, like, as an adult, you're just like, why would you do that to children? Like, they should not be doing that.
They can't handle that shit, man. Don't put that on them.
Yeah, I'm quite excited to see what it is, and I love Isabel Yap's writing. She's such a, like, lovely writer. And then Octavia Cade's Convergence of Fairy Tales is 5 fairy tales, like classics, like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, rewritten in a kind of sort of creepy, weird style that Octavia Cade has, which is like, it's very grown up. Like the first one in the collection opens with some very bad words.
Perfect.
But like just beautiful and clever and lovely, and I just can't wait. I love Octavia Cade's writing. I'm so pleased that both these authors have been working with Book Smugglers because I think they're magnificent.
Wonderful. All right, and then I am, for those of you who watched my wrap-up on YouTube or have been following me on Twitter, you may have noticed a theme, which is that, like, I'm so far down this Kit Roca rabbit hole that I cannot even see the sunshine anymore. Like, these are the only books I've been reading for the last 9 days. I read the first one on November 25th, which I read to distract myself from all the feelings I had about the Gilmore Girls series. But basically, in 9 days, I have read 8 books.
Whoa.
And I have 9 more days to read 6 more, because my goal is to finish the entirety of the Beyond series by Kit Roca by the 13th, which is when the last one comes out. For those of you who haven't... Oh, ladies, it's on. It's going to happen. For those of you who haven't heard of the Beyond series is... I hate to make this comparison, but it is structured in a similar way to Hunger Games in that there is a centralized city and the surrounding area has been divided into 8 districts, essentially, all of which kind of offer a different illicit experience. These books are erotica books, so just a heads up, if that's like not your jam, this is probably not the recommendation for you. But if you're cool with that, like, guys, these books, I don't even have words. These books are like, they're people of color. There is homosexual representation towards all ends of the spectrum. There are twosomes and threesomes and fivesomes and people doing things to other people. And this book is they're just so amazing. This whole series is amazing.
I think I may need to pick these up.
Yeah, clearly it's something we need to
I was recommended these on Twitter, and the super bundle of like everything was on sale for $10, and I was like, nice. I'll pay $10, even if it's not like the greatest. It's a lot of books for $10. Yeah. And then I bought it, and I couldn't stop reading, and they're amazing. So definitely go check them out. The last one drops on the 13th of December.
Oh, but that would mean we've got to read like 3 books a day to catch you up, Chelsea.
Well, I mean, if anybody can do it, it would probably be you, Kaitlin. I'm just saying. Yeah. If anybody else could do it, it would be you.
Well, that's true.
But yeah, I think that wraps up the episode. So thank you guys so much for coming and joining and listening to us. As always, you can find us all over the internet. I will link our respective channels and social medias in the show notes. Join us in the beginning of January for a kind of 2016 wrap up. We'll try to keep it cheery as much as possible as you can for 2016. But otherwise, come find us on Twitter, shout us out, let us know what you thought about how to suppress women's writing, and we will see you guys in about a month.